All right, okay, let's get started. Hi everyone, really excited to be here in this event. There's been so many great sessions over the previous days, and I'm looking forward to presenting this session and also learning from other speakers in the upcoming sessions today and in the other days. Obviously, thank you for all the organizers. It's been a very well organized event. So in today's session, I'm going to be talking to you about one of my favorite subjects, which is ALM and DevOps for Power Platform. So, so this subject is basically been quite important, and I've been quite involved in it. I've been doing ALM for Power Platform for a very long time now, and I would like to share some of my experiences with you today, especially with the way that things in this space are quite evolving recently, and there's often lots of questions around you know, what are my options, what's the best way to do things, where are things going, etc. And I'm sure you may have some questions as well today, which I think hopefully we'll have some great discussions in the end as well. So in case you don't know me, I am Wael Hamza, and I'm a Microsoft MVP. I'm a Power Platform lead as well. And I've been working with Microsoft products for over 20 years now. The first time I came across Dynamics and Power Platform was with CRM version 1.2 back in 2004 at some point. So it's great to see how much the product has evolved over the years, especially when it comes to automating processes and making life easier, not only for end users but also for the people who are building the components. So I've got a few channels on here in terms of social media. So feel free to connect with me or follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn. I've also got a blog and a YouTube channel. I've been more recently adding things to the YouTube channel. So if things like DevOps, ALM, Power Platform, architecture, these kind of things interest you, feel free obviously to subscribe to stay up to date with all the topics around these interesting areas. So let's get started. So in today's session, I'm going to start with an introduction to DevOps, just to give everyone, the basics in case you're kind of not familiar or new to Power Platform or DevOps. Then we're going to talk about some of the things that happen in DevOps and what are the tools that we can use for them. The main focus on today's session is build and release tools. So we're going to deep dive into some of the options that we can use there. And then we're going to finish off with some demos just so you can get a feel of how things are working and, what does it kind of look like to use each option. So yeah, let's get started. So in terms of DevOps, so DevOps is a process that starts with planning what you're going to do, and it ends with the system being operational in your production environments and available to end users. And when I started working with Power Platform and Dynamics projects, we often used to do, releases very infrequently. So, you would plan a release every 6 months, every year, etc. And you'll end up deploying a lot of things, in most cases manually. So you end up, sometimes, forgetting to do certain things, especially when you've got a big team. And the same thing kind of applies to the Microsoft releases as well. In the past, you used to get like 1 or 2 big releases a year, especially when on the on-premise days. And now you can see they're more like 2 waves, and actually the features keep on coming, and you can get a bug fix and these kind of things really anytime when required. So basically, the idea of DevOps is to basically accelerate that deployment or the ability to deploy, features to your end users. And there is a number of stages involved. So you kind of do development, and you kind of build your, packages that you want to deploy, and then you test them, and then you release them, and then you need to manage them. And the idea is everything is, smooth, efficient, quick, automated. So you kind of don't spend too much time on thinking about how do I deploy, how do I test. It's all part of the framework, and you more focus on, how do I build, the feature that's gonna, make the user happy at the end of the day. So in terms of, the different tools that you can use, and sometimes when you join a new organization, it's you can have too many options, especially if the organization has a few options. So I'm just going to walk you through some of the key things that you can consider, and some of the tools that you'll need to kind of do this process end to end. And these are the tools that you can use. Sometimes, depending on the complexity of the project, you may want to opt out of certain tools. But yeah, I'll tell you the list end to end, and then based on the project, you can then decide which ones make sense for you. So from a planning stage, this is the most important stage. We need to get what we want to do right. If we get the wrong requirements in the first place, then we're not going to be able to deliver what the users need. So things like making sure we have a backlog, properly defined requirements, properly prioritized requirements as well is quite important. And in the Power Platform space, or in general, when it comes to logging requirements, you typically use something like Azure Boards, or some companies use Jira or any other tool like Monday.com or any other tool that you want to really use to manage your requirements. And then we move into development. So these typically involve building the apps and extending the apps. And the end goal with the DevOps process is to have everything in version control, so you can see all the history, you can track things. So we typically use things like Azure Repos or GitHub or any other system to do the version control. Once you've got things in version control, then you go into build and release, and this is all about taking things from version control or from your environments if you're kind of doing it that way, and then deploying the changes to your various environments until they get into production. And testing is a key part. You want to make sure that what you're doing is working. So you have typically either manual testing or automated testing, or both. And obviously we would recommend automated testing as much as possible, because it's more reliable. It does take a bit of time to set up as well. So you can use things like Azure Test Plans or Jira or for the manual testing, and you can use all sorts of other frameworks that are available within Power Platform and from community as well, or third parties for automated testing. I'm sure we'll see some of that today. And the final stage is once you deploy your things to production, or as you're deploying them, you want to make sure that you've got the right approvals before you put something in production. So things like ServiceNow can help there. But once it gets to production, you want to basically keep an eye on your system. So one is, how is my apps flows performing? Are there any bottlenecks? Are things working, failing, etc.? So things like Azure Monitor and some of the out-of-the-box things can help, but also making sure you keep an eye on the platform. And what I mean by that is basically, if there is a feature that's going to become deprecated, you want to become aware of it. So you keep an eye on the roadmap. You keep an eye on the health center to make sure that if there is an issue with the platform, you're aware of it. You can tell your users. So it's quite a lot of things involved once you deploy the app in terms of looking after it as well. So hopefully that gives you an idea into all the different stages in DevOps and what tools you can use, and what are the different things that happen in there. So now we can start to deep dive into the build and release area, which is the main focus of this session. If you're interested in any other areas, let me know, and perhaps we can do a session in the future on some of the other bits. So when it comes to Power Platform, if you want to move your app from one component or from one environment to another, you basically need a solution. And a solution is more like a container where you put all your apps and components, and then you move that into the other environments. So you typically start from a development environment. You create your apps within a solution, and then once you build your app, then you increment the version of the solution. You deploy it into your test environment, and then you get your testers to have a look at it. And then if you think there's something not right or needs a bit of improvement, then you go back into dev, you upgrade the version, you do your changes, and then you deploy it again into test. And at some point, in test, you'll be happy with the solution. So you say, I'm ready to deploy to production. So you move that solution to production. And then the same cycle continues again. So you may want to up your version, start again in dev and move your solution to production. So that's the typical flow. You start from unmanaged, ideally in dev, and move it to manage in all the other environments. So what are the steps that we're doing in here from an automation perspective? Let's assume we want to automate this. So you can do this obviously using the UI. So the first step is the ability to update the version of the solution, then publish your customizations before you export. And then you want to export your solution and then import your solution. And in an ideal world, ideally, we put everything in a solution and we're deploy that solution to a test environment and everything is going to be fine. We don't need to do anything else. And I think the platform is getting there, but there are still sometimes things you want to do outside of that to get your configuration done and making sure that things are working. So that's why I refer to the additional steps, and that is something you will need to take care of when you're doing your automation and deployment as well. So how do we do the previous process? There is two kind of processes that you need to follow. So one of them is build and next one is release. So build is all about taking your customizations and configurations and then packaging them and then producing some packages that you can then deploy. So your sources could be, your configurations, your extensions, your pro dev capabilities, your data, etc. And then there's different stages that happen through the build process, and ideally you want these to be automated. So things like exporting your solutions, compiling your plugins, signing them, optimizing your scripts and running some, different types of analysis and tests on it. So the idea is once you go out of the build, you've got some idea about the quality of your solution as much as you can from an automated perspective. And then if you're happy with all these outcomes, let's say your unit tests are passing and, you've got no issues with, you're running your solution checker, then you can produce your packages and these are ready then for deployment. So the release process takes off from the build process, so it uses the build process as an input, and then it does release your components to different environments. So you can see the left hand side is what comes out of the build, and then the release process can contain a number of different steps. You can have approvals, you may want to do backup of the environments, you may want to execute additional tests or import data or send notifications to people. It all depends, how much you want to do. The bare minimum is obviously importing the solution to your environment. And then obviously you've got loads of environments that you can do this to. I think the bare minimum is to have one test environment and one production environment, but you could have demo environments, you could have special test environments, pre-production environments, depending how critical the system is and how much really is required to make sure that your product is meeting the requirements. So these are the two stages. So when it comes to Power Platform, we typically got different personas working on a project from a maker perspective. So we have, let's say, citizen developers. They're using the Maker portal to build apps and flows and other things. And once they do that, obviously they put some, all these components in a solution. And then we also have our pro dev capabilities or pro devs that are using to extend the platform further and do the things that require a bit more coding. So they typically use Visual Studio Code, or any other tool that is required. And they, then they kind of put their components as well into the solution as well. So at this stage, you've got everything in the solution. You could also consider perhaps end users as well, in addition to citizen developers and pro devs in here. But you could argue whether end users need really to follow ALM or not, if they're kind of just building personal productivity. I think for the purpose of this session, we will be assuming that we are going to need ALM and DevOps. So basically everyone is working together to form fusion teams, and basically, business working with IT and other stakeholders to kind of contribute to building the solution and make sure everyone is on the same page and collaborating very closely. So once that cycle is finished, we want to take our changes and move it across. So when we talk about ALM processes, we want to make sure that whatever processes we build, they're suitable for the different personas. So they're suitable for citizen developers. They don't need to be too complicated. For citizen developers, at the moment, they need to be sophisticated enough so that the pro devs can, do these final touches and sometimes the complicated deployment steps as well. So in terms of build and release tool options, I'll take you through some of the options that are available, and it's probably going to be more like a kind of a walkthrough kind of a timeline of how things have evolved in Power Platform. So at the bare minimum, with Power Platform, you've got Dataverse APIs and some of the SDKs, and these have been around since the beginning, more or less. So you could build apps and components on top of these to automate your solution imports, etc. And then you've got your automation toolkits, which came in a bit later. So these come in the form of either kind of PowerShell scripts or modules or CI/CD extensions or CLIs. Sorry, CLIs, not CI/CD extensions. And then you've got your CI/CD tools and extensions. So if you want to do like full ALM, then you can use things like the Power Platform build tools and Power DevOps tools and other frameworks. And then more recently, we're seeing like first-class experiences, like how do we build something that is very suitable for end users, citizen developers? How do we make life easy for everybody? So you can see things like the ALM accelerator, the built-in pipelines that we can use as well. So as you can see, there's lots of options and things can be overwhelming sometimes. So in general, the options at the top are more suited for citizen developers, while the options at the bottom, they're more suited for pro devs. And in general, it's quicker time to market to use some of the options on the top. But because you use the options on the top, sometimes you lose a bit of flexibility. The good news is that all these options are extensible, so you can combine, mix and match, and we'll see some of that in today's demo as well. So starting with the APIs and CLIs. So when it comes to Dataverse, you've got the Dataverse web APIs, and these allow you to really manipulate everything that sits within Dataverse. So you could create tables, modify tables, you could query data, update, delete, all the CRUD operations. And there are some special functions and actions you can do as well. And when it comes to ALM, you will need to use some of these special operations. In terms of using the Dataverse web APIs, you can really consume it from a variety of tools. So you can write C# apps, you can use PowerShell, JavaScript. You may need to worry about authentication in some of the options. But yeah, you can pretty build much anything. As long as it's got an API, you can build something on top of that and automate it. So if we look at the previous solution flow that we had, for example, we have an API to update the solution version, which we need to do in development. We've got an API to publish customizations. But if we look, for example, at the import solution, you actually need to call 3 APIs to get that done. So you need to start the import, pass the file, then you get an ID back, you want to monitor for that import job, and then once the job finishes, you need to download the kind of log file, etc. So if you're writing code to do this kind of stuff, 1, you need to be aware of all these APIs, and 2, you need to know, how they work, and as you can see, you need a lot of coordination and stuff. So it can be quite overwhelming, and you need to do a lot of effort to make this work. In addition to the APIs, there's lots of PowerShell modules that come in within the platform. So you got the main module, which is the Power Apps admin module. So you can use this module to manage your environments, do some final touches on your flows and apps once they're deployed, things like sharing, managing permissions, etc. And you can manage your connectors and data loss prevention policy. So if you want to add a new connector because it's required as part of the next release, you can do that to your DLP policy as well. Next thing is we've got data. So there isn't any system really that exists without data. And data is kind of 2 things. One of them is the reference data, which is like, list of countries and, some of these values that you want to keep consistent. And obviously the data that is created by the business or, the live data. So when it comes to reference data, we want to make sure that that is consistent. So we've got things like the configuration migration tool. So you define your schema, you export your basically data from the development environment using that tool and generates a zip file. And then you can use that same zip file to import it to the target environment. And we'll see some of that later today. And sometimes, even when you import your solution, you want to do some additional things. So we've got another tool called the package deployer. So you create a project using a template in Visual Studio. And that allows you to not only import your solution using this, but also allows you to import your data and execute some custom C# code. So if you've got people on the team that are very familiar with C#, this could be one of the options you could use to kind of do some pre and post import steps as well. And once you've done all of that, you can either use the UI to deploy the package, or you can use the CLIs or the scripts to also automate the deployment of that package. And finally, we got the Power Platform CLI. So the Power Platform CLI basically allows you to do all the admin and maker activity that you would want to do using a command line interface. So you've seen there's APIs, there's PowerShell modules, and a few other tools. So the idea of the CLI is to kind of combine all of that into one. So the way to use it is basically you install it as an MSI, or you can get it as a NuGet package, or you can get it with one of the Visual Studio Code extensions as well. And then basically you've got a lot of operations that you can do using the CLI. So whilst we're here, let's do a quick demo of some of the things that I've talked about, whilst we still all these things are fresh in our mind. So let's start with the PowerShell module. So PowerShell basically is quite easy. So for example, if you want to find out more about your tenant settings, there's a command for it. On this machine, I've already installed it, the Power Apps admin module. So, but you can see if you want to find out about your tenant settings quite easily, you can just hit one command and it will give you all the tenant settings. There's another one if you want to update it. Equally, if you want to get more information about DLP, you can get information about your DLP policies, and you can use the same kind of things to update them. So as you can see, you can combine these commands together to kind of form a script that you can execute either on your machine, or you can then use it in CI/CD system. So the next thing is the Power Apps CLI. So the Power Apps CLI, once you install it, it basically comes with a pack command. So and then if you type pack help, you can basically get a list of all the different commands that are available. So if we want to know more about solutions, we can type pack solution help, and again it will tell us all the commands that are available for solutions. So let's say I'm interested in the import solution. So again, I just need to do import, and it tells me all the different options that I need to do for an import of a solution. And you can see there's quite a few things in there. So you can decide whether you want to activate plugins or publish changes and things like that. If you want to export a solution, this is an example, for example, that I've done before. So all you have to do is just do an export, and then put the solution name that you want, and whether you want to manage or manage, and which environment you want it from. And then once you do that, it basically just goes into the environments and starts to export the solution. So it's quite simple, as you can see. The issue with that is you could obviously do these commands on your local machine, but every time you want to do an export or import, you have to type it in. So one way to make your life a little bit easier for that is to basically script the information. So you can use something like a PowerShell script. So in this case, I've created a script that takes an environment as an input, and then it just does the export, and it's got all the parameters predefined. And you can see there are some options that you can put in here, like whether you want the auto number settings or the customization settings, etc. And sometimes if you have more than one person working on a team, they can export without or with these settings, and you can get different behaviors in your downstream environments. So if you write it as a script, make it available to everybody, everyone can hit the same script and they will get the same output. So that's one way of doing it, but you still have to execute your scripts, and especially when it comes to citizen developers or end users, it's probably not something they would want to do. But you can see the export solution has worked. So if I go into my folder, you can see that the solution has been exported, and then I can use another script to get that imported. So as you can see, using CLIs, PowerShell tools, you can do quite a lot, but you still have to know these tools, and you still have to configure them, and there isn't really any orchestration that you can do at this level apart from doing it yourself manually. And you could argue that if you had the UI, it would be a bit easier. So let's move on with the presentations. So the next thing is CI/CD. So looking back at the import-export scenario, we still got our maker, building apps in dev. The difference is once the maker finishes from building the app, he or she can trigger a build, and then the build starts. And then what the build does is basically automates everything that we need to do. So there is a system called the build automation, which is the CI/CD tool, and basically can update your version, export your solution, and then we'll put the solution in a safe place, which is the artifact repository. If I did this on my machine, the solution will be on my machine, and then other people wouldn't be able to get to it. So the idea here is you put it in an artifact repository, and then the automated release automatically kicks in, downloads the artifact from the artifact repository, and then imports it in the test environment. And then once we're ready to deploy into production, then we got somebody approving a change, and that goes into production. So all that process that happens around build and release automation that I described previously and managing the artifacts is referred to as the CI/CD process. The idea is that you're continuously testing and deploying until you get the right outcome. And ideally, you do this as early as possible so you can know about your defects and issues as early as possible. And to do this, you require DevOps engineers. So you need DevOps engineers in your team to configure that process. And once it's configured, then the maker can use this process. What tools are there that could help us with this? There is the Power Platform build tools. So this has been available since a few years now. July 2019 is the first release. So it's got a lot of tasks in there around importing, exporting solutions, and managing environments and all this kind of stuff that you need to do your releases. So I'll show you some of that in a bit. And then next is if you can't find what you need in the Power Platform build tools, there is a community tool that I've actually created, and it's been around since 2017, and it's open source on GitHub, and it's got additional tasks that you could use in your build and releases. So I encourage you to obviously take a look at that. If you can't find what you need in the Power Platform build tools, you can find perhaps what you need in this tool or in any other third party or community tool as well. So let's have a look at how that looks in terms of pipelines. So let me share my screen. Not that one, sorry. Okay. So this is my dev environment here, and I've got a solution, and this solution's got a couple of apps, connection references, environment variables, plugins, and a few other bits and pieces, configurations, tables, all this kind of good stuff that you want to deploy. So when it comes to pipelines, there is, as I mentioned, there is build and release. There is also, so in Visual Studio, there used to be a build and release option, and now there's pipelines and releases. And you can split them into a pipeline for build and release, or you can have a YAML pipeline that kind of combines everything in one stage. I'm going to show you today how the kind of UI bit works, because it's sometimes just easier to explain and see things. So this is my build pipeline. So let's have a look at what this build pipeline is doing. So this pipeline is basically, we've got a solution, and we've got the deployment package and version control, and we've got some data as well. So it's going to do all of these things. So deploy the solution, deploy the package, deploy the data. So the first thing I do is, actually, before we get into that, you need to decide where your sources come from. So in this case, it's coming from an open source project on GitHub. I need to decide where that pipeline is going to run. So in this case, it's going to run in the Azure DevOps, but you can have your own virtual machines that you can run these on. Then you build your solution. This is building the package. And as you can see, if you can't find what you need in the pipelines kind of tasks, etc., you can resort to PowerShell. So in this case, I'm creating some folders where I want to organize my artifacts. But yeah, next step is to basically use the Power Platform build tools. So I'm updating the solution version, and then I'm exporting the solution. So this is the environment URL. This is the solution name, which I've put in the options in here, so I don't have to repeat myself every time. Before you can actually connect to an environment, you need to come into the settings and create a connection to your environment. So you can pass in things like your credentials or your client secret, etc. But once you do that, you can pretty much select your connection from here. So at this stage, I've updated the solution, I've exported the solution. So now I want to basically package my data from version control. So I've put in my data in version control. So for this one, I'm going to be using the Power DevOps tools. So all it's going to do is basically go into version control, and it's going to generate a zip file from the data. And this is the location in version control where I've got my data. If we browse through that location, this is my version control. So you can see there is a folder for data and the reference data, and under that I've got the data in here. What I've done additionally with the Power DevOps tools is I didn't want my data to be all in this file, so I've ran a process that splits the data into different files. So when it comes to version control management, I can easily see the changes to each data. So if I update one entity, only one file changes as opposed to the file changing every time. So basically all this is going to do is going to package my data, and after that I'm just going to publish all the different artifacts. So how does that look at the end once this executes? So let's take a look. So let's take a look at the one that I've executed yesterday. So the idea of the build again is to run your scans, which I'm not doing in this case, but you will ideally want to do that, and then package your data. So in this case, I've got 3 folders. First folder is my data zip file. Next one is my package that I want to execute in C#, and then the last one is the solution plus some other configuration for my apps and deployment. So once I've got the build, I then go into release. So I've got a release pipeline for this one. So let's take a look at the release pipeline. The release pipeline takes the build as an input, and these are the artifacts, and then executes a number of steps. So starting from the Power Platform build tools, and then I'm using some extension to basically replace some of the parameters depending on the environment that I'm targeting. This is again a community extension. And then I'm using the Power Platform build tools to import the solution. And you can see I'm pointing to the solution zip that I've exported from the build. And then I'm importing the data, pointing to the data file as well. And then I'm deploying the package as well, which is the DLL that I've packaged from version control. So even though I've exported the data using the Power DevOps tools, I can use actually the Power Platform build tools to import the data because they all use the kind of same format and tools underneath. So I've done everything I needed. So there is a step that I wanted to do that I couldn't find at the moment in the Power Platform build tools, which is probably going to come in at some point. So I've used the Power DevOps tools installer, which is I want to share basically my app. I've imported my app. I want to share it with users because otherwise, people can't see the app. So basically, I've created my connection to the environment, and I've put in the app name, and I want to share it with a group, and I want to share it, with this group. Once this step executes, it will basically share the app, with this group, so people can access it. So that's basically the release pipeline in this case. As you can see, it does a quite fair amount of steps. So if you want to see in terms of how that looks when it runs, basically it looks like that. You can go in and basically look at all the different steps that are happening. So if you want to look at importing the data, you can see all the different steps that is taking to process the data file. You can obviously chain multiple environments, have approvals, and all this kind of stuff. This can be fairly complex, but for today's demo, I just kept it quite simple. So yeah, hopefully that gives you an idea in terms of how to use pipelines. You obviously need a DevOps engineer to be available to set all of this up, and it does take a bit of time to get it set up. So even for somebody like me who's been doing this quite some time, you always misspell something, or you forget to put in the right credential, or you forget a step, and the process will fail a few times. So I've been testing some of this yesterday. You can see how many failures I got until it got to working, and you can see from the time when it wasn't working until it got working. So yeah, I mean, you could get it right from the first time, and I've done it before, but you're likely to hit a few issues, and you need to tweak your build and release. And every time you execute this process, it does take a bit of time to get it working. So hopefully that gives you an idea in terms of what CI/CD pipelines can do for you. So next step is I'm going to talk about is the built-in pipeline. So let's jump quickly into the presentation for that. So similar process, we've got all these environments that we want to move our solutions across. We've got the maker building the app. The only difference now is once the maker finishes building the app, they don't have to go anywhere. Previously, they would probably need to go into the visuals into the Azure DevOps and trigger the build. There are ways around it. You can intercept the events from the maker portal and trigger your build automatically. It requires a bit of work, but again, that requires a bit of additional setup. But in this case, maker finishes and then he doesn't have to go anywhere. Maker stays in the maker portal and just decides to deploy the solution. So what the maker portal does, it exports the solution, all the usual stuff, stores the solution in a pipelines environment. So this is different than Azure DevOps. So we started with doing things on your machine. You store things on your machine. Obviously, you can copy them into other places later. Then we moved into Azure DevOps, where it stores the artifacts in Azure DevOps. And now we're having something called the pipelines environment. So this is another Dataverse environment that you need to set up, and it will basically store all your solutions that you export from your environment in there. And we'll see that in a second. So, so yeah, once you do that, then you import your solution. And then you've got, again, the ability from the maker portal to basically deploy that solution to your production environment if you wanted to as well. So when it comes to deployment, you're not really leaving the maker portal. So the approver, the maker are staying in the maker portal to manage all of that. And this capability, all of this stuff that happens in the maker portal and your pipelines environment is called the Power Platform Pipelines. And there are ways to extend it. So this box is probably gets bigger if you start extending things, because you can use other features, as I will show you, to extend it. So that's a high-level overview in terms of how it looks like. So to configure the maker, the built-in pipelines, you don't need a DevOps engineer. So to get the basics set up working, you need somebody who can set up a Dataverse environment and do a few configuration, which is good. You may require some additional skills if you really want to extend it further, but we'll talk about that in a second. So yeah, let's jump into a demo before we kind of take any questions. So again, this is my solution that I want to basically deploy. So first step is go into my admin portal, create a new environment. In this case, it's called the COE environment, and then go into the Dynamics 365 apps. And if you scroll down through this list, once it shows up on the screen, you'll see there is an app somewhere called here, Power Platform Pipelines. And I'm missing some updates. So I should probably update it to get some of the new features. But yeah, you need to install this application. Once you install it in this environment, you get basically an app that you can manage your configuration. So basically, what you need to do is you need to create all your environments. So what you do is you create an environment and you put in the ID. So that's all you have to do. And you have to decide whether it's your development environment or whether it's your kind of target environment. So development environment is where the exports will happen from, and the target environment is where you want to deploy into. So once you put that ID and decide, you save it, it will automatically come up with a name and validate the environment that it exists. So in this case, I've got 3 environments. I've got my source environment, which is my development environment, and I've got 2 target environments. One of them is test, one of them is prod. If you go into the test one, again, similar thing, just the target environment. Once you define your environments, you want to create what is called the pipeline, and this is the step that decides, how the solution is going to flow from the development environment into the other environments. So again, this is another record in Dataverse. So as you can see, it's quite familiar. All these things should be familiar when it comes to configuration. So you give it a name, and then you need to link your development environment into here. So it's just a normal link, and then you need to define your stage. So I've defined 2 stages. One of them is test. So again, I just give it a name. So I call it test. It could be the same name as your environment, or you can call it something else. And then you need to decide one thing is, what is the previous stage? And obviously this is the target environment. And the other thing that you need to make a decision on is whether you want to extend this pipeline. So by default, we'll just export, import the solution. But if you want to do something before the export of the solution, or before the deployment, or after the deployment, you have to then tick these boxes. And if you want to use service principles as well, you need to tick this box as well. So there's a few extension points that you can decide. And these extension points happen using Power Automate. I'll show you that in a second. So let's have a look. I'm just going to show you the test environment as well. Sorry, the production environment. So production environment is the same as the test environment. The only thing I'm doing here is I'm saying before you deploy into production, make sure that you've got a deployment, successful deployment into test as well. So that's how you're chaining the environments. So let's have a look of how that looks for the maker. So I've got the solution screen in here. So in your solution, you should see a new button here called the pipeline. So once you click on that, this is the pipeline that I've just defined, and you've got the option of basically deploying. So you can see the two stages that I've defined, test and prod. And you can see I've already done some deployments, but I haven't done any deployments here. But if I want to do a deployment, basically I click on deploy, and it will ask me whether I want to do it now or later. So if you want to do it on a weekend, you can do, and then you can get notifications by email if it doesn't work. So once you click on that, it does take a bit of time because it needs to analyze the solution, see if you need to set up any connection references or environment variables. So the good thing is you can do all of that within the UI. So I guess whilst it's doing that, we can probably take a look at some of the other things. Oh, actually, it came back quickly. So yeah, all you have to do is basically just fill in any missing information. I've already set up my connection references, so it's not showing up in here. But if I click next, this is the next version of the solution. I kind of validate, can put some deployment notes in terms of what I'm deploying. And once I'm done, I just hit deploy. And as you can see, having left the maker portal, it will start exporting the solution. So in terms of how you can extend this, there are some sample Power Automate flows that you can use. So I'll show you some examples here. The only thing is my Teams add-in is in the way. Let me just move it. Give me a second. Let's have it this way. Okay. Yeah. So you've got some extensibility using Power Automate, and the way this works is you've got the option to hook into multiple events. So in this case, let's actually look at this one first here, the one here first. Let me stop sharing for 1 second. I think this is gonna be easier. Okay. All right. Let me share again. Okay. Hopefully, screen. Okay. And so I trigger on here, so you can see there's a Power Platform Pipelines category, and you've got a number of events here that you can select. So you can do something before the deployment completes, before the deployment gets started, after it completes, all this kind of stuff. And you've got some sample solution on GitHub that you can install that gives you some of the predefined scenarios. One thing you can do is in the settings you can obviously filter the trigger. So instead of this triggering on all the pipelines, you can say I'm only going to trigger it on this pipeline or on this environment or on this kind of stuff. So once you've done the trigger, basically this trigger is set up before the deployment starts. It's going to ask for an approval. And then we'll send an approval via Power Automate, and then if somebody is happy, then it can go ahead. Otherwise, if somebody declines the approval, then it will fail the deployment. So this is one example how you can extend it. You can also do something after the deployment. So this is before the deployment completes. The good thing about this is obviously you got the full power of connectors available to you. So you can use, for example, the admin connector to assign an app, similar to what I was doing in Azure DevOps. What you can also do here is, if you really wanted to, is you can also trigger a build or release pipeline in Azure DevOps. So you could actually start some additional steps using Azure DevOps. So once you kind of start going into this area, you're kind of requiring these DevOps engineers as well. Typically when you use Azure DevOps, you're kind of starting from version control and moving all the way across. Here you're kind of starting from the maker portal, you export the solution. So if you trigger a release, you have a challenge of what build do I tie it into. So it's almost like you need to trigger a build, as your export is happening, and then do the release in here. So it can be a bit complicated to get organized and synchronize things when you're starting to trigger off releases from pipelines and things like that. So you need to have a bit of a think about it in terms of how you want this to work to make sure everything is synchronized. But hopefully there will be some features coming into pipelines. It's a fast-growing area, so hopefully we'll see some additional features to manage things like version control and things like that. So yeah, basically at the moment the deployment will be waiting my approval. So once I, it's telling the deployment is pending. So once I do my approval, it will basically come and deploy it to all the environments. Hopefully this gives you an idea in terms of how you can use pipelines and how you can deploy things using the different capabilities. As you can see, there is lots of different options available. And the decision will be basically, depending on what skills you have in a team, how complex is your solution, etc., and how much time you have to set it up. The easiest way is to start with pipelines. If your requirements are not very complex, and extend it from there if you need to. If you've got CI/CD capabilities, you can obviously use that as well. And you've always got that bottom layer around CI, CLIs, and PowerShell if you really want to extend this even further. So hopefully that gives you an idea today. And if you've got any questions, if you've got some time, I'm happy to take them now.
Thank you so much, Wael, for this amazing session. I'm sorry. If you have any questions, just raise your hand or type it on your chat window. Okay. Okay, Sheikh.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Sheikh.
Here you are.
Hi, Wael. We would like to use ALM Accelerator. We are trying to explore that. The difference we see with Power Platform pipelines and then ALM Accelerator is that Power Platform pipelines does not have the option to check in our solution components, right, into the Git or GitHub. That's where we see the advantage of going with ALM Accelerator. So do you see, anything we need to take care, like very high level, because we haven't explored 100% ALM Accelerator for our project. But our main requirement is to have our solution components to be checked into somewhere, some source control. Just want to, if you have a minute or so, if you want to share your experience with ALM Accelerator.
I've not used it extensively. You can put things in version control. Obviously, you can listen to certain events, for example, and then you can, as part of the solution export, you can, trigger a process that stores your configuration into version control. So your question is around whether you can use pipelines to put things in version control, yeah?
I don't think so, right? Can we use pipelines to put components into the version control?
Yeah, so you've got an event on the pipelines, like the export event. So if you hook into the export event and trigger a Power Automate flow, you can then in that Power Automate flow, you can trigger a pipeline, and that could be either GitHub or Azure DevOps. In fact, there's an example on the Microsoft Docs for GitHub. So basically, you pass in the solution name to that pipeline, and it will export it. It will use the solution that was exported and store it in version control for you. So you got that copy in version control. And every time you do another export, you can obviously do another copy into version control. So that way you can, keep your version control up to date with what's happening in your pipelines if you wanted to.
Okay. Anything about ALM accelerator? Probably, I mean, as you said, you haven't explored that, or ALM accelerator?
I've used it in the past, not recently. Yeah, LM Accelerator is, you've got loads of templates, and it's driven by version control, so you can do that quite well. But it does, require a bit more knowledge about the LM Accelerator. You need to know how things, link together, and you need to kind of go and adjust scripts if they don't work for you. So it's a lot more extensible and is a lot more sophisticated at this point, I would say.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. Thank you.
No problem.
Hi, this is Varma.
Yeah.
I would like to know that whether we can auto build our plugin code and deploy to the steps even to the Power Azure DevOps. Sorry, Power Platform Dataverse.
Using pipelines or using CI/CD?
Using CI/CD.
Okay, so you want to move your plugins from version control into your environment, yeah?
Yes, directly deploy to the environment.
Okay. Let me share my screen back. I'll quickly show you if you got 1 minute. Let's have a look. Yeah, so in the pipelines, okay, let's have a look at this one. I've got pipelines for everything you can think of. So in the Power DevOps tools, there is a few tasks that you can do to manage plugins. So you can, for example, there's a plugin registration task where you put your DLL and the JSON, and it will register your plugin. So you basically build your plugin here, and then you register your plugin into the environment. So you're basically updating the plugin in the environment before you do the export, if you wanted to do that way. So that way you can make sure that your plugin that is in the solution is the same one that you have in version control, as opposed to, because somebody sometimes can change the plugin but don't commit the source into version control, and then the two are out of sync. So if you intercept the export event and you update your plugins before the export, in theory you could do that using this task. You can do the same thing with web resources as well, because that's something else that could be out of sync, or any other component that you have, really. Does that help?
And is it the same process for the PCF controls as well?
I mean, you could follow the same approach. I mean, obviously this one just works for plugins and web resources, but yeah, you could follow the same approach for PCF controls as well. May need a bit more work, because I've not tested these with PCF controls.
Okay. Thank you so much for answering my question. Thank you.